In this video, we're going to move on to the next major feature inside of MCP servers, which is resources. To help you understand resources, we're going to be implementing another feature inside of our project. Here's what we're going to add in. I want to allow a user to mention a document by putting in an @ symbol and then the name of a document. Whenever they do so, I want to automatically fetch the contents of that document and insert it into the prompt that we send off to Claude. So in total, there's going to be kind of two aspects to this feature. Whenever a user types out the @ symbol inside of a message, we're going to automatically show a list of all the different documents that they can mention inside of a little autocomplete window. Then, whenever a user submits a message with a mention inside of it, we're going to automatically get the contents of that document and insert it into the prompt that we send off to Claude. So for example, if a user says something like, "What's in the @report.pdf file?" I would want to assemble a prompt like this and send it to Claude. So we're going to have the query inside there from the user, and then we're also going to tell Claude that the user might have referenced some document, and here is the contents of the document. So the approach here, or the idea here, is that we will not have to rely upon Claude to go and make use of some tool to figure out what is inside of the report.pdf file. Instead, the user can just preemptively mention the file, and we're going to automatically insert some context ahead of time. Now, one thing I want to clarify here is that we're kind of talking about two separate features. The first feature is that whenever a user types in the @ symbol, we really need the MCP server to give us a list of all the different documents that the user can possibly mention. And then the second aspect here is that whenever a user submits a message that contains a mention, then we need the MCP server to give us the contents of a single document. To get this information out of our MCP server, we are going to be making use of resources. Resources allow our MCP server to expose some amount of data to the client. We usually define one resource for each distinct read operation. So in our example, we need to get a list of documents and read the contents of a single document. So we would probably end up making two separate resources. One resource would be responsible for returning just a list of document names, so we can put them inside the autocomplete. And then we would probably make another resource that will expose the contents of a single document based upon its document ID. When we define these resources, they are going to be accessed through our MCP client. So the entire flow that we're going to eventually put together here, whenever a user types in something like "what's in the ", and then presumably they're going to put in something right there, as soon as they type in that @ character, we need to display a list of document names to put in the autocomplete. So our code is going to reach out to the MCP client, which in turn is going to send a read resource request off to the MCP server. Inside of that read resource request, we're going to include something called the URI. That is essentially the address of the resource we want to read. This URI gets defined whenever we put together our resource initially. So the URI is that right there. When we send off this read resource request, the MCP server is going to look at the exact URI that we put inside of here, and then run the function we put together right there, take the result, and send it back to us inside of a read resource result message. We can then take the data inside there and display it inside of our autocomplete or do whatever else we need to do with it. There are two different types of resources, direct and templated. You'll also sometimes see direct resources referred to as static resources. A direct resource just has a static URI, so it's always going to be the exact same thing, such as docs://documents. A templated resource will have one or more parameters inside of its URI. So for example, we might have document/ and then kind of a wildcard right here. So we can put in any document ID we want to. And whenever we ask for this resource, that document ID right there inside the URI will be automatically parsed by the Python MCP SDK and provided as a keyword argument to our function. The keyword argument will have the exact same name of whatever string you put in right there. So doc ID right there will be doc ID right there. As you can probably guess, we'll make use of templated resources anytime that we want to allow a little bit more selection or variety or customization in what someone is asking for out of our MCP server. Implementing resources is pretty straightforward, so let's go back over to our editor and we're going to add in some resources to our server right away. All right, so back over inside my editor, I will find the MCP server.py file. I'm then going to scroll down a little bit and I'm going to find some comments for writing a resource to return all document IDs and writing a resource to return the contents of a particular document. Now for this first one right here, I put in the comment document IDs. Remember, for us, our document IDs are essentially the name of the document. So for us, we're really just returning these IDs. They're going to serve the purpose of the name. That means we can put them directly into that autocomplete element. All right, so to make our resource, I'm going to delete that to do, and then I'll add in a mcp.resource. The first argument is going to be the URI for accessing this thing. Again, it's kind of equivalent to a route handler. So I will use docs://documents. And I'm also going to add in a MIME type of application/JSON. A resource can return any type of data. So it can be plain text, it can be JSON, it can be binary data, anything. It's up to us to kind of give our client a hint as to what kind of data we are returning. To do so, we're going to define this MIME type. A MIME type of application/JSON is a hint to our client, who's eventually going to ask for this resource right here, that we're going to be sending back a string that contains some structured JSON data. And so it would be up to our client to deserialize that data, or essentially turn it into some usable data structure. Underneath that decorator, I'll write out my function of list docs, and I'm going to return a list of strings. And then inside there, I will return list docs keys. So just take all the keys out of that dictionary and turn it into a list, and I'm going to return it. Now, you'll notice that we are not returning distinct JSON here. In other words, we're not actually returning a string. The MCP Python SDK is going to automatically take whatever we return and turn it into a string for us. All right, let's take care of our second resource. So I'm going to delete that comment and then replace it with MCP resource docs://documents. And then this time I want a templated resource because I'm putting in this wildcard right here. And then my MIME type this time around, just for a little bit of variety, I'm going to be returning plain text because it's going to be just the contents of the document, and I'm not going to wrap it up in any kind of structure. Now, just so you know, in a real application, something like read a document, I would probably return an entire document record. So some kind of dictionary that contains maybe the ID, the content, the author name, the author ID, and stuff like that. But just for the sake of an example, I'm going to return just the text out of the document to show you how we would normally return plain text. So in this scenario, my MIME type would be text plain. And then I will make fetch doc. I'm going to take doc ID, which is going to be a string, and I'm going to return a string. Once again, whatever word you put right there, it's going to show up as a keyword argument inside of your function. If we added in some additional parameters inside of here, such as maybe doc type or something like that, it would just show up as an additional keyword argument like so. Then inside of here, I'm going to first make sure that the ID that this person is asking for actually exists. So if doc ID not in docs, I'm going to raise a value error with a F string that says doc with ID not found. And then if we get past that check, I will return docs, doc ID. And that's it. Now let's try testing this stuff out inside of our MCP inspector once again. So remember, at our terminal, we can run the command uv-run mcp dev mcp server.py. That's going to start up a web server at port 6277, or excuse me, 6274 is the default. So I'm going to make sure I open that up inside my browser. Here we go. I'll click connect. I'll then find resources, and then I should be able to list out all the different resources that are available. Now, when I list out resources, this is going to be specifically static or direct resources. So I'll see only docs/documents. And then I can separately list out all my different resource templates. And so I'll see that I have one resource template of fetch doc. I'm going to first try to run the /documents right here. We'll see what we get back. So this is the actual message, the exact structure that gets returned from our MCP server. You'll notice that it has a text property, and inside there is all the data that we are returning, serialized as a JSON string. So again, it would be up to us inside of our CLI application to take this text right here and deserialize it from this JSON string into a usable list of strings. Then we can also test out fetch doc. So I'll click on that. I have to enter a doc ID. So I'm going to put it in. I want to read the report.pdf file, and I'll read the resource. And now I should see the contents of that particular document. And you'll notice this time around, once again, I get a text plain. So that's a hint to me that this is plain text and I should not attempt to deserialize it from JSON in any way.